Hello. I'm back with you today to talk to you about the music of Laura Nyro. In my last video, I spoke about Blood, Sweat, and Tears, and there is a tie-in with the music of Laura Nyro and Blood, Sweat, and Tears. Many people have never heard the music of Laura Nyro, but they have heard the music of her hits. Her songs have been recorded by Blood, Sweat, and Tears. They had a big hit with And When I Die. The Fifth Dimension did Stone Soul Picnic. Barbra Streisand did Stony End. And the list goes quite on and on. Blood, Sweat, and Tears also did He's a Runner. So many people have heard the songs of Laura Nyro, but they've never heard the albums. So today I would like to talk to you about her second album, which is Eli and the 13th Confession, and then her third album, which is York Tendaberry. But first of all, Eli and the 13th Confession. I remember seeing this album around quite a bit when I was growing up. Probably I was about 11 years old, and I would see it in the record stores. And to see this image, it had no, I think it had a sticker on it sometimes on the cellophane, but so it had no title on it. It's just this beautiful image of Laura, almost as a Madonna figure, meaning like in the religious sense, but almost like a Madonna portrait of Laura. And I always would see this album, and I would always be puzzled. Who is this? And eventually, I took a chance on the music of Laura. I didn't buy this album, first of all. In 1971, I bought her album that she recorded with Patti LaBelle and LaBelle, and it was an album of oldies produced by Gamble and Huff. It's really an outstanding album too, but there's no originals on that one. It's all R&B covers. It's an excellent album, and that was my first introduction to the music of Laura. But after hearing that album, I was so impressed with her vocal qualities and her piano playing that I purchased this album. And this album is really a standout in the canon of Laura's music, because she had an album before this called More Than a New Discovery, which included some of her hits. There were songs that would become some of her hits. But Verve Discovery Records really didn't know what to do with her. They were trying to produce her more as a mainstream pop star. She didn't play the piano on her first album, and even though the album is great, I really enjoy that album, but it sounds completely different than any of the albums that she would do afterwards. It sounds more mainstream pop. But with Eli and the 13th Confession, Laura was given a lot more freedom. She had a new producer in Charlie Caleo. He was a producer. He had produced The Four Seasons and an early rock person named Lou Christie. He had a song called Lightning Strikes. But he really knew what to do with Laura. He really appreciated the artistry of Laura, and he let her play the piano, and he built the arrangements around her instead of vice versa. And it really gave it a completely different sound. Many of Laura's songs have different time changes, and one of the things that really shines on this album is the drummer. It's really unfortunate that the album included no personnel on it, and I actually had to go to a book. It's called Soul Picnic, The Music and Passion of Laura Nyro by Michelle Court. If you're interested in more information and a good bio on Laura, this is the one to go to. I think it's actually the only one. But in this one, I was able to get more information about who were the personnel on this album. And there was a piano player, a percussionist named Artie Sharek. And he was friends with Charlie Caleo, the producer. And he wasn't even playing drums at the time, but he thought he would be a good fit for this music. And as you listen to this album, he did start playing on the sessions. I mean, he really adapts so well to the different varieties and time shifts of Laura's music. So it really makes the music move and swing in a lot better way than her first album. One of the other things I like about this album is there's a song called Lonely Woman that features jazz great Zoot Sims. The story goes that he came on a rainy afternoon, that the basic tracks had already been recorded, and he was just going to add his saxophone to it. And he pulled out his sax and in this big on a rainy afternoon in this big studio, and he just blew some amazing sad sounding saxophone that just full of soul, and it just fit the song perfect. And Laura and the producer, they were just truly blown away about how beautiful Zoot Sims sounded on this track. It also has a song called Eli's Coming, which was had become a hit eventually for the Three Dog Night group. And that's a really good song, especially the way Laura does it. It's almost like a movie. It takes you through so many moods and changes. And at one point it says, almost sounds like Laura's vocal, she's falling down an elevator shaft or something. It's just really intense. And that's the way with so many of the songs on here. It just takes you through so many shifts and different moods. It's just a really beautiful experience. And this one and the other album, perhaps is best listened to on headphones, because you can really get into a zone all your own, where you just hear that it's Laura singing to you. Next is New York Tendaberry. New York Tendaberry would be somewhat even different than the Eli album, in that the sense that the arrangements were even more sparse. On this album, she was produced by Roy Haley, and he let her piano become even more to the forefront. It's very sparse, and maybe even say dark. Laura sounds very solemn at times, but then all of a sudden she builds it up to a crescendo depending on the song. So for many Laura fans, this is perhaps their favorite album. I would borderline say it might be mine. It's a toss-up almost between these two. But it has almost a very New York sound. You can see Laura, this is, I believe, at her apartment in New York City. And then, of course, it's got a black and white photo of Laura in the back. But it really has a New York feel to the album. A couple of the highlights for me are one of the songs is Tomcat Goodbye. It starts almost like a show tune, and then it slows down. And at the very end, Laura does a phrase, my lover man, and it just was such intensity and such soul, and with her piano playing, and then right at the very end, it's just got a little taste of strings that just sweetens up the emotion of it just a bit. It's just beautiful, and it's a really amazing how they just do those subtle touches with the strings. And I really encourage you to listen to these albums on headphones, because that's how you really appreciate all the nuances of the music. Another great song on here is Save the Country. It was in 1969. That was the time of Martin Luther King's assassination and Robert Kennedy. So all the things that were going on in the country were, of course, on Laura's mind. But musically, one of the stories behind that is there's a very amazing trumpet part at the end, where it almost sounds they're in procession to go to war or something, save the country. But yeah, it's a very intense trumpet part, and I guess the trumpet players were having a difficult time, performing that part. And so Laura, she called on her friend Lou Soloff, who at the time was with Blood, Sweat, and Tears. And either because Lou was fresh, or he's a great trumpet player, he nailed the part right away. And if you listen to that, it's an amazing part of Save the Country and the whole album. But I can't say enough about the beauty of this. Once again, New York Tendaberry. The album ends almost just with a little whisper, where she just whispers the words of New York Tendaberry. And once again, the song is an ode to her love, and how she grew up in New York City and becoming a young woman, and all the battles that she faced with love and loss, and alcohol and drugs, and everything that goes along with becoming more mature in the big city. So Eli and the 13th Confession, New York Tendaberry. Explore the music of Laura Nyro. Most of you have heard it before, but I encourage you, listen to the albums. And also, like and subscribe.